While the numbers of Latinos receiving a college degree has risen, the number of degrees conferred on Latinos still trails most other groups. Of the 1.7 million bachelor's degrees awarded in 2010, 71% of those are to white students. 10% to African American students, 9% to Latino students, 7% to Asian and Pacific Islanders. So despite an increase in high school and college graduation rates, our youth are experiencing conditions of persistent inequalities in a tough economic climate. The racism also works against our interests when it comes to the labor market. Often we hear that the hiring of Latino and African American workers remains low because employers, they just can't find workers with the education and the skills needed among our communities. Yet never have there been so many people of color with college degrees. A look at the overall national data from the last 5 years also counters this racializing view, given that it points to massive job shortages at all levels of education. While workers with higher levels of education face substantially lower unemployment rates, they too have a large percentage increase in unemployment. Workers and a college degree or more are still more likely, without a college degree, are more likely, right, to suffer unemployment. But what we see here is that this notion that people are not educated, there's not enough people that are educated to fill certain positions, is really a bunch of bullshit. I mean, for lack of another way to put it. And although young Latino and Latina students tend to express real optimism about their future, I mean, when we listened to the students last night, you know, they place value on education, hard work, and educational success. National statistics indicate that they are much more likely than white youth to drop out of school, become teenage parents, live in poverty, experience high levels of exposure to gang activity and police profiling, be incarcerated, and more apt to be targeted for military recruitment, which incidentally is they justify it because the military says that Latinos are considered to be underrepresented in the armed forces. So they want to create greater diversity. There's some kinds of diversities that we could do without. Shrill, porque tú sabes, cuando una mujer, you know, if you get too pissed off y todo, you know what happens, right? Get that bitch off the stage, right? 1 in 7 youth nationwide is considered to be disconnected. This is a new term, meaning that they are involved in neither school or work, a percentage that has grown dramatically since the economic recession. According to a study released this last September, nationwide, 5.8 million young people aged 16 to 34 are living on the margins without even part-time jobs. Low-income African American and Latino youth nationally are more likely to be labeled disconnected, including more than 1 in 5 African American youth. The statistics are even more alarming for African American young men. 26% are neither in school nor working, compared to the 19% of young African American women. However, in the Latino community, more young women, many already young mothers, than young men are labeled disconnected. I mean, this is an interesting piece because often, you know, we need to work with all our students, but we need to look at some of the realities that are happening so that we can engage then those realities within education and within our communities to truly serve the needs of our communities. And as would be expected, you know, this phenomenon of disconnected is most present in communities of color where older adults must persistently contend with higher levels of unemployment. So, you know, all of this is like a big puzzle I'm trying to build, to put together so that we understand that this struggle that we're waging is not just something that's coming out there just because we just want to bring it out of our some kind of rhetoric that we have. This is beyond rhetoric, and this is my whole issue here. There are conditions, historical conditions at work. Hence, many of our youth experience classical symptoms that are often called alienation, fleeing from the unspoken trauma, the trauma of poverty as cited earlier, but also the trauma of educational conditions that negatively impact brain development and rob our children of their innate intellectual capacities. These colonizing conditions include restrictive language policies, assimilative curriculum, teaching to the test, high-stakes testing, inappropriate assessment criteria, and push-out practices of suspension and expulsion. Some youth take solace in gang membership. I mean, that's just the way it goes. Substance abuse, or even cyber wars, in an effort to deliberately disconnect themselves from the dehumanizing realities that abound in their everyday lives. Such distractions, unfortunately, can also blind them to possibilities of empowerment, and thus, through stifling ideologies and social behaviors that are directly contrary to their physical well-being and their moral development. The bodies of Latino youth are so often pushed to the edge in perhaps an unconscious acting out or quest for awakening from the numbing sterility of a world that materially, culturally, and socially colonizes and institutionalizes them by separating mind from matter, body from feeling, thought from heart, and learning from passion, effectively stripping away or disrupting their capacity to become conscious of the individual and collective power that is their birthright as human beings. And as such, many of our youth become bonded victims of what Iris Marion Young called the 5 faces of oppression, namely marginalization, alienation, domination, exploitation, and violence. From very young, education under the guise of schooling begins to erode the enormous capacity of our children to feel and experience the world organically by disrespecting and marginalizing the knowledge that working class Latino and Black students bring to the classroom. The colonizing educational paradigm privileges white culture with its disembodied and abstract view of knowledge. In a million different ways, the hidden curriculum of schooling and the mainstream media strip our youth of their natural sensuality, of their soulfulness, and of their passion by infusing them with a colonized gaze anchored in false dreams and desires. At the very moment when their formation of critical consciousness most requires a sense of belongingness, a sense of rootedness in history for its evolution, our young people are betrayed, pimped, and consumed in the name of the free market with its brutality and its greed. When caught in the assimilating web of US corporate advertising, Latino youth can lose their cultural anchor, calling forth the words of José Martí, Cuba's warrior poet of compassion, when he wrote, "Corazón que lleva rota el ancla del hogar, va como barca perdida que no sabe a dónde va." And as such, youth of color without their cultural anchor of their history and a clear sense of their community and their identity become far more easily controlled and manipulated or coerced by sensationalized desires and manufactured pleasures of the marketplace, for which they often pay dearly, even with their lives. Indifference and skepticism are two potent forces in the neoliberal world we occupy today, which breeds hopelessness and passivity, domestication, as it strips us of courage and voice and passion. In the necrophilic culture of the marketplace, human warmth, that sense of connecting and loving one another recedes, and we are left with a sterile mechanization of existence. Blood and violence are then celebrated within racialized, patriarchal, and colonizing narratives of homespun homogeneity. In the firm contradiction to this defilement of our humanity, the uncompromising purpose of education must be that of liberation. Liberation of the self, liberation of nature, liberation of all those fixed colonizing myths of social organization that would deem us passive objects rather than full, responsive historical subjects of our lives and our communities. Overcoming the colonial legacy of dualism ushered by an elitist racializing Western assumptions of reality must be central to the education of Puerto Rican youth on the island and in the United States, until we no longer neglect to integrate our academic knowledge with the realities of our lived histories. When students, I want students to go to college, but I don't want students to get lost in college. I want them to go to college and remember that the greatest knowledge that they have, they already have it. The issue is to go to college and to understand how they take that knowledge and how you fight with that knowledge to change the world. Aquí, okay? Overcoming the colonial legacy then. of dualism is huge, because we must recognize that we are capable of going beyond the machinations of powerful and instrumentalized notions of truth that sustain the greed and ambitions of the wealthy at the expense of the many. Through overcoming our own fixations with materialistic technologies and hierarchies of domination, we have the possibility of moving in heart, body, mind, and spirit toward human sensibilities that emerge from the soulful evolution of our individual and collective empowerment. Pedagogically, we as educators for global justice and human rights must strive towards the development of the whole person. La mente, el cuerpo, el corazón y el espíritu, inseparable from our collective moral progress as emancipated human beings. As such, the imagination, intuition, inspiration of our youth, three element components, essential components of critical thought, can develop organically through our capacity for sustained dialogue. A dialogue that arises in an organic human context of exchange. You cannot have a dialogue by yourself. It is impossible. A dialogue has to arise through our connection, where our individual feelings and perceptions based on our lived experiences and historical struggles become connected to the larger communal process of emancipation, and through this process finds the means by which, as Freire reminds us, we better read the word and the world in order to transform it. But here again, we must be clear about the purpose of education. Education, as Freire and many others contend, must be fundamentally about human liberation. Moreover, Gregory Baum argues that true dialogue takes place only among equals. In fact, to recommend dialogue in a situation of inequality of power is a deceptive ideology of the powerful who wish to persuade the powerless that harmony and mutual understanding are possible in a society without any change to the status quo of power. It is absolutely impossible. It is for this reason that Freire insisted that we cannot unveil or dismantle the hidden curriculum of capitalist schooling and corporatized media without adequate opportunities for dialogue and community participation, without adequate opportunities for us to bring our minds and hearts together, which in my mind constitutes then the very genesis of empowerment and critical consciousness. It is not surprising then that the hegemonic tradition of schooling, whether overtly or covertly, functions to thwart participation and empowerment despite this rhetoric of civic engagement. A recent Gallup poll, we got to bring Gallup poll in this, right? Released this month, porque tú sabes, uno usa lo que tiene. Whatever you can use, let's use it and then look at it. So there's Gallup, it just came out, just this month. It showed that the number of students who are physically, intellectually, and emotionally engaged in school declined steadily between 5th grade and 12th. In elementary school, the kids are 80%, are thought 80% of these kids really seem to be engaged. By middle school, that number drops to 60. And when the students enter high school, that number drops to 40. Some possible causes cited in this article for this monumental disengagement includes the overzealous focus on standardized testing and curricula, and a lack of experiential and project-based learning pathways for students, not to mention the lack of pathways for students who will not or do not want to go to college. It's worth us noting here then that the meaningful curriculum, experiential and project-based learning and alternative pathways in addition to college, along with community participation, have been the very cornerstone of the Pedro Campos High School since its inception. No, Jose, this is not a little project. This is not a little project. Con el contrario, es un proyecto que tiene tanto que enseñarle a la gente. However, for the majority of working class Latino students and other students of color, in the absence of opportunities for critical dialogue and relationships grounded on the principles of equality, of participation, of shared decision-making, and solidarity, the colonizing culture of the mainstream education